getting good solid backgrounds. We were in the youth astronomy clubs. Remember all that stuff? So it's an interesting position. And this, by the way, had worldwide effects. I mean, people worldwide became interested in space exploration and astronomy. And some of us are direct descendants of this whole thing right here. So, it's interesting that we were so focused on getting a man to the moon, and no matter what the cost, money or people-wise, the Russians were too. And so we'll continue to see this saga develop. I need hours to talk about it. It's a fascinating topic. Again, looking at some firsts here. And again, you can call them propaganda. You can call them technology. Whatever you want to call them. Of course, the Soviet Union launching the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova. How long did it take the United States to do this? It was Sally Ride and STS-7 before we finally launched a woman in space. Now, there are those who will say this was truly only propaganda, but still the Soviets recognized the importance of that. The first multi-spacecraft flight, now I don't know if you know about this. And this is again historical, and you can interpret it as you want to, a little bit of Reynolds ideology here, but the Soviets knew the United States was about to begin their new Gemini program, the two-man spacecraft. And so the Russians, the Soviets, again wanted to one-up. So they took the wonderful Vostok, which was their one-man or one-woman spacecraft, took out all the safety equipment and the launch ejection seat, and for Vostok 1, put in 3 seats so they could have the first multi-person spacecraft. Had you heard that story? I mean, this is, as you start reading into Soviet documentation, it's come out since the Cold War, you'll see a lot. It's really, really fascinating. And there's others who say, hey, the Russians just want to have the first multi-person spacecraft. Like Vostok 2 carried Alexei Leonov and a second cosmonaut, and he did the first extravehicular activity. Now, did you know he nearly died? When Alexei Leonov went out to do the EVA, he went outside the Vostok, actually it's called Voskhod since they had repurposed it, went out of Voskhod 2, and his spacesuit inflated like the Michelin Man. He was out only a few minutes. He could not get back in because the spacesuit had inflated, and he had to let the pressure out of the suit so he could fit back into the hatching it back in the spacecraft. We didn't know this until Soviet curtain came down and realized how close he came to losing his life. United States had some interesting firsts also. Gemini 6 and 7, the first rendezvous of 2 spacecraft in space. Gemini 8, Armstrong and Scott docked with an Agena docking target, which, by the way, they nearly died. They made a successful docking, and one of the thrusters on the Gemini 8 misfired, and they start tumbling. Armstrong was able to get control of the spacecraft by using his reentry retro rockets, and they had to make an emergency landing. So again, that's where humans were able to make that sort of, major adaptation and save a mission. The first long-term space flight, Gemini 7, which is Borman and Lovell, and the first working extravehicular activities, Geminis 9, 10, 11, and 12, 12 being the Buzz Aldrin flight. Again, just little bits and pieces. This is Alexei Leonov's spacecraft. He had a module here that he had to slip out, do his EVA. He, again, had to deflate his spacesuit to get back in. Ed White, who can forget that 21, 22-minute Gemini 4 spacewalk of Ed White? Gemini 6 and 7. And again, here's the Soviets and their spacecraft. I need hours to do this, Tim. Hours. This is, it's interesting. Sometimes you get a bit cocky, and we see this a lot, I think in every country, but United States, the Apollo 1 fire, where we were doing what's known as a plugs out test on the pad. Gus Grissom, veteran of Mercury and Gemini, Ed White, first space walk for American spacewalk on Gemini 4, and Roger Chaffee, a rookie, died because of an electrical fire fed by a pure oxygen atmosphere. A poorly designed spacecraft on the Americans' part, shabbily put together. The good news is the entire spacecraft was redesigned and probably saved the Apollo 13 crew. But again, we were just, things had gone so smoothly, apparently, had gone so smoothly. They hadn't gone as smooth as we let everybody believe, but they'd gone so smoothly. We just pushed this through, and 3 astronauts died on the pad, which is unthinkable. The Soviets, it was interesting, historically said, this will never happen. We will never allow one of our comrades to perish by some carelessness. A few months later, Vladimir Komarov was killed because the new Soyuz spacecraft had all sorts of technical problems, and when the spacecraft re-entered, his spacecraft tangled up in the chutes and hard impact, and he was killed upon impact. Just a true tragedy. And this was not the only Russian tragedy either, but nonetheless a tragedy. So,
was that known at the time? Or did this just...
No, we knew this. We didn't know all the details, and still there's a little controversy about when was it known that Soyuz 1 had failed. Some say they knew it as early as right after launch, that he was actually talking to his wife from on orbit about, this is the last time I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to die. And so it's an interesting, a little bit of controversy. We did know he was killed. We just did not know what degree. In fact, go ahead, Sean.
Yuri Gagarin, the one who was actually spec for that flight, and
Yuri Gagarin was actually killed right before this flight. He was killed in a heart attack.
Oh, okay.
And that's why, by the way, John Glenn never flew again because President Kennedy did not want anything to happen to John Glenn because he was a national hero. Did you know that? Okay. Of course, he ended up flying the space shuttle. But just, interesting little bits and pieces of politics as I've done the research here. Again, Tim, I need hours. Well, the question is, what will we find on the moon? And nearly everybody in this room will appreciate this. We would find Alice Cranman, of course, what will we find on the moon? So, that was always, in the 60s, was the push, was getting to the moon. And we start lunar exploration with a series of unmanned spacecraft. And by the way, the Rangers, we had 9 Ranger missions, only 3 succeeded. We did not have good luck with the Rangers. The surveyors, we had 7 missions, 4 succeeded, and the lunar orbiters were actually very, very successful. I love this series of Ranger images. I've just selected a few. I'm just going to let it run automatically. So what the Ranger would do is take literally a photograph and send the photograph back to Earth. And so as the Ranger approached the moon, you get these series of photographs that would give us some idea. But in those days, think about lunar geology. We didn't know if a spacecraft would sink on the moon. What was the moon's surface really like? We really didn't know. And so you had this final impact image. Well, actually, it wasn't the final. You had an impact image and then kind of like a test screen. Lunar orbiter, 5 images is really very, very high quality images. Again, allow us more lunar exploration. The surveyors, which were phenomenal. These soft landers, which would dig and scrape and have us understand a little bit better about what happened with these pads on the moon. Would we be able to land a spacecraft? Would it sink into dust? These are things we're quite unknown. By the way, this is photographed by Apollo 12 astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean. Conrad brought the lunar module within spitting distance, if you could spit on the moon, within spitting distance of Surveyor 3 and went over and took pictures and brought back parts of Surveyor 3. Lunar missions themselves, the Gemini was used to provide techniques necessary to go to the moon. The mighty Saturn V rocket, an incredible rocket, incredibly successful rocket, was designed specifically for this. Apollo 8 orbiting the moon in Christmas 1968. Apollo 11 making that first lunar landing. Politics involved there. Who was going to be on that original crew? It was truly the intent of Deke Slayton, who was the chief of the astronauts, to have one of the Mercury astronauts, in fact, Gus Grissom, command that mission. Gus Grissom was killed in the Apollo 1 fire. As the timing worked out, as far as the cycling, Neil Armstrong was at the right place at the right time and was one selected to be the first out with Buzz Aldrin following him. 6 lunar landings, total 12 men, and of course the Russians have not yet landed a man on the moon. Again, I could talk an hour about that. I mean, just that's fascinating, fascinating. Lunar exploration by the Soviets did not stop. They sent a variety of unmanned landers, brought back samples, did some really good work. I mean, this truly was the original. You think about the days of Mars rovers, the Russians were pioneers here because they had rovers they would control from Earth to actually rove the moon. So, absolutely fascinating. Again, just wonderful stuff. Humans on the moon, yes, we did go to the moon. It amazes me still, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it amazes me still that there are people who do not believe we went to the moon. It just amazes me. You think about conspiracy theories, and I know there are things that, we all, well, anyway, I think there's some things that occasionally get kind of changed or, covered up or whatever, but think about all the thousands and thousands of people who worked on this program, and you are going to tell me that one didn't come forward and say, no, we never really, it was all faked. I was very fortunate as a kid. I was at Kennedy Space Center for launch of Apollo 11. And that rocket went somewhere. Maybe it went to a Hollywood stage, I don't know. Of course, the movie Capricorn 1. How many of you have ever seen Capricorn 1? It was a movie that came out right after the end of Apollo. It talked about faking a mission to Mars. I think it had O.J. Simpson in it, so, which, by the way, he got killed, but anyway. And, of course, the Apollo 11 landing site. All of us who set up telescopes are always had the question, can you see the flag? Can you see the flag on the moon? Well, actually, from the LRO, here's the base of the lunar module. I don't see the flag, but at least there's the base of the lunar module. So, we've been there. There's another Mythbusters. There's a great Mythbusters. If you ever have friends or acquaintances or bozos who want to know if we've been to the moon or not, there's a great Mythbusters program about did we go to the moon. And in fact, I show that to my astronomy classes every semester, don't we, Yvonne? And I say, I'm not going to say anything. Here it is. And they know better than, most of them know better if they're going to get a grade that's worth transferring in my class. So anyway, lunar exploration, absolutely a milestone that was kind of a golden age, quite frankly. Beyond the moon itself, both the United States and the Soviets built space stations. The Soviets had very good success with space station exploration. They had their problems, though. They lost a 3-man crew returning from one of their very early Salyut space stations where apparently some leak developed in the Soyuz. A valve got kicked open or got knocked open, and air got sucked out, and they all 3 asphyxiated. So, very, very unfortunate accident, but space is a risky place still. On the Apollo Soyuz test project, where the 2 countries came together in 1975, flew a mission, which a rendezvous and docking mission between American Apollo and Soviet Soyuz spacecraft. The Space Transportation System, better known as the Space Shuttle, flew from 1981 to, and I do kind of wipe my eyes at this, 2011. I want to talk a little bit about politics here, but we'll talk about this in just a moment. The Soviet Union are still flying modified Soyuzes. Very successful space vehicle. It's compared to the shuttle, its technology is kind of crude, but it works. And it's the only way for us to get into space today. I'm just going to let silence fill the room on that one. And of course, the space shuttle, they had a one-flight space shuttle, which we'll talk about. Our Skylab, That's another hour conversation for another time. Again, the ability to be able to rescue what appeared to be a doomed mission to allowing Skylab to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Apollo-Soyuz test project, again, the American command and service modules, the docking module carried by the Americans and the Soviet Soyuz. The Americans launched on a Saturn 1B rocket on what was known as the milking stool. This is a Saturn V pad. This is the milking stool. And the three Americans, which included Deke Slayton, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, and the two Soviets, which included Alexei Leonov, who did that spacewalk. So it was a really kind of, Tom Stafford, really a very, very advanced brand, one of the, later flew the Shuttle, a very good group. The Shuttle, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is another hour conversation, Tim. You want to talk about some interesting politics here. I'm just going to lay it out there, okay? Many of you, when you came down to the Keys, you drove down the Keys, and there's a large canal that's known as the Aerojet Canal. The Aerojet company was building rocket boosters. They would test them and bring them through the canal. When the shuttle, which is, by the way, not what we originally had envisioned, but the shuttle was finally designed, there was a request for qualifications made for the solid rocket boosters. There were 2 or 3 companies responded. Thiokol out of Utah and Aerojet. Aerojet had recommended and proposed a solid rocket booster. They would build them, bring them through the Aerojet Canal and up to the Cape. And so there would not be segments where you'd have to put them back together, which led to the Challenger accident. It was a solid rocket booster. And of course, the Thiokol proposal was selected. They had to be broken into segments and brought in from Utah. On railroad. Have you ever seen those cars, by the way? The cars for the Thiokol solid rocket booster say, "Do not hump." I'll let you figure out what that means, but I'm going to just talk about this little piece of politics. I'm going to leave it alone after that, and you make your own decisions. This was, of course, assembled during the Nixon administration. Jim Fletcher of Utah was the head of NASA at the time. I'm just going to lay that out there. You know, again, I'm not trying to walk either side of the aisle here, but I would just mention that for your reflection. Okay.
Question?
Yes, please. Just jump on. I'm a teacher. Just jump on in.
Wasn't there a lag between the Skylab and the first launch of
Yeah, you talk about Skylab's last mission was what, 74, and STS-1 with Crippen and Young didn't fly till April of 1981.
Right.
So there was a lag.
So my point, though, is that the outrage over America not having a launch vehicle is somewhat overstated.
Well, I think the issue, Sean, and we'll talk about that. Okay. Tim, I need about 3 hours here. I think the issue here is that we knew the shuttle was coming, and I think it's not. I'm not just going to talk about just the Obama administration, but you know, this is something that should have been thought out for years. I mean, you know, NASA in a sense is I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I love the space program. Don't get me wrong. You know, I've been to 67 launches at the Kennedy Space Center of the shuttle alone, covering 67 launches at the Kennedy, including Challenger. I was there for Challenger. It's almost like a rudderless ship. The direction keeps changing, not just depending on who the president is, but we don't have a we will go to the moon by the end of the decade type of goal anymore. And you know, you can say what you want to about someone like a Newt Gingrich who stood up and said, "We need to have moon calls," and everybody laughed at him. So this is a great political discussion. In a sense, it's a rudderless America. Not even as much, and everybody in this room will appreciate this one. This is reality check. Remember what happened when NASA said, "We're going to abandon the Hubble Space Telescope." How many people wrote Congress and said, "By God, you're not going to do that. We've got to have the Hubble," and they saved the Hubble. But we don't hear as much of an outcry about the shuttle. Well, we heard some, a little bit of bemoaning here and there, and things are coming. It's a little bit. It's not as bleak as it sounds. This is a photograph I took from the press site for STS-135. 5 orbiters were used, a variety of payloads flown, assembly of the International Space Station. And of course, we lost 2 of the 5 orbiters with 14 astronauts. And several of you were down, Vaughn, you were with us down for the last shuttle launch and landing. And the launch, it was a fairly joyous event, but the landing was somber. I've been to landings before, and the shuttle would land, and people would cheer. Atlantis landed, there wasn't a peep. I mean, and people were crying because they knew that was kind of the end of an era. But I'm going to say something else that some of you may not like hearing. We needed to retire the shuttle. The shuttle was going to be an old spacecraft. It has a lot of miles on it. There are some technologies about the shuttle that are very difficult. We just need to be able to go on to something else. That's a Reynolds position, not, that's my own feeling on that. Very, very fortunate. These are some photographs I took, actually, of the launch. I call this one, by the way, this is like about T plus 4 minutes, T plus 5 minutes. I call this the ghost of the shuttle. This, of course, is the solid rocket booster plume, broke through the clouds, and look at the shadow of the plume above the clouds on the cloud top. So that's the ghost of the space shuttle. I kiddingly say I finally got the photography right. It took me 135 launches, but I finally got it right. The Russian shuttle called Buran only flew 1 mission, unmanned. 1 mission, that was it. Interesting. Again, this is another hour conversation, Tim. These are wonderful, 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 interesting stories. Well,
can you say briefly why they abandoned the program?
money, very, very expensive. The shuttle, whether American or it's Russian, it's super expensive. The shuttle, our American shuttle was sold as getting stuff into space cheap. Never panned out. Very expensive. Very expensive. It was a good idea, but very expensive. And actually, it's the most technologically advanced vehicle ever built. The shuttle main engines, SSMEs, very, very complex. They always feared one of those would blow up. We never had that happen. They never suspected we'd have a possible solid rocket booster issue, though there were indications of earlier shuttle missions before Challenger there were burn-throughs. There was a military mission that was flown by Ken Mattingly a year before Challenger. They had burn-throughs of the solid rocket booster. They just never thought it would become catastrophic, or the vast majority of the managers did not think it would become catastrophic. Space station's complete. Shuttle's last mission is last July. I don't know if you heard this news, but what was it, Lon, about 3 or 4 months ago? There was a press release put out by NASA that they're building a new crew exploration vehicle. It's going to be ready to fly manned. Hear that, Sean? Manned by 2014. Where did this come from? Last summer we all heard, we're moving on. America's not going to do this anymore. We're going to let private enterprise do it. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, they're going to take a Atlas V, man-rated, and use it as a launch vehicle. Did you guys know that? You don't hear about it. So 2014, America's going to be back in business, it looks like. And of course, where are we going to go next? Are we going to go to an asteroid, a hemorrhoid, the moon, or where are we going to go? I don't know. There is a big debate. And this is more politics. Again, another hour here, Tim. I apologize. We could really get into great conversations here. Why even spend any of our federal money at all on space? The main reason, and again, this is where I don't think NASA does a great job of this at all, the spin-offs, some direct, some quite indirect, that have affected all of us. Electronics, we don't even talk about cell phones, do we? Medical materials, satellites, those that live in Florida and elsewhere that are threatened by hurricanes, we appreciate weather satellites certain times of the year. It is a OMB, which I don't know how much you trust OMB, but it's a fact that for every dollar we invest in our space program, we get $7 in dividends back. I don't know about you, but I'd sure like to invest in that personally. I mean, just think about that. And again, think about, I'm not talking about Tang, I'm talking about real stuff here. I mean, think about how that has really affected us. So, thank you, Don Parker. What's the current American access to space? Well, right now, it's Wile E. Coyote and the Acme rocket. I do have to thank my good friend Don Parker, who supplied me with this many years ago, and I have used it to its fullest, Don. But here's a perfect example of Wile E. and the Acme. The expense of space itself, again, we can't afford it. Do you know we spend less than 0.5% of the federal government budget on space exploration? The NASA budget proposed by the president, which is about flat, is $18 billion. I know it sounds like real money, but think about other things. We won't get into those politics. Well, we could, but we won't. What would the lack of a U.S. space effort mean? Who's monitoring the sun for solar outbursts? What about the threat of asteroid impacts? What about our need to explore? Okay, so we're going to leave this to the Chinese, the Russians, everybody else? I'm one of these weirdos. Well, you already know that. But I'm one of these weirdos. I'd love to see more true international partnerships in space. But America still needs to lead that, even though it may be the U.S. space station, not the International Space Station. And there's this big debate that goes in science. Unmanned is, well, cheaper, it's less dangerous, it's more flexible. Manned is, you think about the issues with manned, it's manned. Human touch, feel, taste, see, experience, ability to fix something. And this is still a hot debate in the United States and elsewhere. But again, a nice quote from Right Stuff, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. So it's kind of interesting to see that. Other countries, again, the list of countries that have launched satellites is fairly extensive. Brazil, China, European Space Agency, India, Israel, and Japan. China, of course, has recently become watch the Chinese, mark my words, it's on tape. The Chinese have become very, very interested in space exploration. They have launched a taikonaut, they call them, a Lang Liu, and the United States and Russia, Soviet Union have had guest astronauts from all over the world. The Chinese, though, don't seem to be pushing like the early American and Soviet space program. They seem to fly about one manned mission a year, unlike the Americans and the Russians who are flying at least 2 or 3 a year. But they seem to be very methodical. Very similar spacecraft, by the way, to the Russian Soyuz. The future. Hopefully we'll continue to man the International Space Station. There was some calls that we should dump it. Those have disappeared. The United States did pay most of the freight there, but again, it was truly, the Russians participated, the Japanese, the Europeans, the Canadian arm. There's a lot of good contributions here. A lot of going on with private space exploration. Following Atlantis launch, and before Atlantis' launch, I got a chance to spend a lot of time and did a lot of blogging on astronomy about what's going on with these private countries may be right too, but companies. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Joint missions, U.S. to the moon, asteroids, Mars. And as I like to say, science often mimics science fiction. Day the Earth Stood Still, one of my favorite flicks, Forbidden Planet, with Robbie. And the Astrogator. The guy who steered the spacecraft was the Astrogator. That's, right. Of course, SpaceX and their successful launch of the Falcon 9. They're building a Falcon 9 heavy lifter. They call their spacecraft the Dragon. Do you know why it's called the Dragon? Elon Musk's kids liked Puff the Magic Dragon. Seriously, that's how you name the spacecraft, is Dragon. The Dragon has different configurations, whether you want to carry cargo or people, up to 7 people into space to the International Space Station. The Russians are working on a new shuttle called the Kuiper. It's supposed to be first unmanned flight sometime, they say, and first manned flight sometime. The Russians have also have a space tourism vehicle, which seems to be something very hot. The Planet Space is developing something called the Silver Dart. It's an 8-person lifting body. Canadian Aero 3-person spacecraft. They've already done some test flights of that. The Crew Space Transportation Vehicle being built by Boeing and Bigelow. The New Shepard VTOL being built by, these are cool things, and this is kind of neat to see this happening. The Lynx rocket plane, which is horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing by X-Corps. The Dream Chaser, this was announced when we were down for the launch of STS-135 Atlantis. They're building a lifting body in Sierra Nevada. Looks kind of space shuttle-ish, doesn't it? Well, those flying bodies should look kind of like that. You can book your own. You can book your own, only $200,000. What do they have, like 1,000 people, Vaughn, that have signed up for this?
That's